Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This is going to be a long one. I read a lot of things between the 13th and the 20th of January, so I would get a drink and get comfortable because there's a lot of things to talk about. Before I jump into what I read, I do just want to address something that people have been asking me about. People may have noticed I have not done end of 2022 content. That's because honestly, I don't like end of year content. I don't typically watch it unless it's my friends and I'm supporting them, and I definitely don't like filming it. And the reason I'm not doing any best of top books of 2022 is because if I was to try and narrow down, even just with my 5 and 6 star reads, not counting the rereads I did last year, which automatically fit into one of those two categories, I still have over 150 books that I would have to choose from, and I can't do that. So I'm just going to put it out there. If you hear me talk about a book multiple times, it's probably because I've really enjoyed it. And I'm sorry if people want that content, but I don't have it in me to do that. That said, if you do want to see something like that, I did have a TikTok video where I pulled the first 10 books that really stood out for me for 2022 that I just literally grabbed at random physical books that I had. There is a video of 10 of those books. You're very welcome to go watch that, but that is not an exhaustive list. It is not everything that I read. It is literally just what I could lay my hands on at the time that I filmed that particular video. I will leave that link down below if you really want to check it out, but there will be no subjective talking video about my best of books because I've already talked about them throughout the year. As I said earlier, this is my wrap up for the week of the 13th till the 20th of January. I read 15 things this week, not including secret project things. So we're going to get through quite a bit. I'm going to try and be as brief as I can about some of these. Some of these will also have specific videos on my kids' channel. Some of them will have other possible videos or recommendation lists coming out here on my channel or live shows or things like that. So those books I'm going to try and keep fairly brief because you're going to hear about them again. Okay, so we're going to start off with some middle grade and young adult titles first. There is Are You There, Buddha by Pip Harry. This is a middle grade verse novel about a girl who is just starting high school. She is living with her father and her stepmother, and she really doesn't have contact with her mother, who has moved overseas for an ashram and is very unreliable. And so she has a lot of conflicting feelings towards her mother and towards her stepmother, and you know, all of this is heightened because she's also starting high school and she's dealing with mean girls and she is dealing with the pressure she places on herself to get into the state championship swimming trials. I also forgot to mention that she is worried about getting her period, and that is a big part of the discussion in this book. So for those of you who like honest discussions about that, that is fantastic in this story as well. So she's got a lot going on. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous verse novel. Pip Harry always does an amazing job, and I will be having a specific video on verse novels on my kids' channel, hopefully in February. Which leads me into The Way of the Dog by Zana Fraillon, which is another middle grade verse novel. This one is a very, very hard-hitting one. It is about Scruffy, who is a puppy at the start of the book on a puppy farm and is not treated particularly well by the farm owner, and the farm owner's stepson eventually frees them both, but then tragedy strikes, the boy is injured, and then Scruffy is separated from him. And it's about the way that the dog Scruffy makes his way through the world. It's told entirely from the dog's perspective, so we view the world through dog's eyes. It is both emotional and beautifully written. Just be aware the child is injured in a hit and run accident on the road, and be gentle with yourself because that is something that is hard to read about. And then a young adult title that I read, which again is for another project that I'm doing, reading the Australian young adult books that were nominated or shortlisted for the Victorian Premier Literary Awards for this year. And this is The Tree of Ecstasy and Unbearable Sadness. This is actually a picture book, but it is definitely a picture book for young adult readers. This is by Matt Ottley. The very cool thing about this book is that Matt Ottley also composed a scored background for this, so that while you're reading, there is a 50-minute track that is orchestra and choir and tenor singer and also an audio narration that guides you through this story, which is incredible. That's the way that I listened to it. I had the soundtrack playing and I had the book and the illustrations in front of me. This is a very, very hard-hitting book about a boy who experiences psychosis and mental illness, and it is his descent into that and the way that he finds his way out of that. So this is going to be triggering for a lot of people, so I do urge people to be careful going into this, but it is incredibly powerful. It is an immersive sort of journey, so well worth checking out It is a absolutely gorgeous book. I've read a few of Matt Ottley's picture books for older readers in the past and they're all incredible, but this one is just stunning. Okay, then we move into my adult titles. I finally picked up Here for the Right Reasons by Jodi McAlister. She is an Australian romance writer. This is a closed door romance, but it is set on the set of a Bachelor-like TV show called Marry Me Juliet. Our heroine Cece is a contestant on Marry Me Juliet. It is the start of the COVID pandemic, the COVID-19 lockdowns, so please be aware of that if you're going into it, if that's a trigger for you. It is part of the story, not the actual pandemic, but the fact that the contestants end up in quarantine and then they have to stay on site, even if they're eliminated from the show because of the lockdowns, so it's a big part of the story. Cece is a contestant and she is concerned because she basically loses her job because everything shuts down, and so she sees this as an opportunity to still earn some money and be able to stay afloat. Her introduction to the Romeo of the TV show is disastrous, to say the least. She is not comfortable on camera. She is the worst in front of the camera, and she's eliminated on the first night. We find that out very quickly. She ends up forming a friendship with Dylan, who is the Romeo of the show. It's their romance. And it was great. Like, Jodi McAlister, if you don't follow her on any social media, she is a huge Bachelor and reality TV fan. And you can tell because the way that she writes this is very realistic, while also demonstrating a love for the genre of reality TV, which I do not watch. Can't stand reality TV, but I enjoyed this book. And then I'm going to jump into the second Jodi McAlister book I read, which is actually the companion book to this one. So this is the story told from the perspective of Cece, and we only get her perspective. The companion book is Can I Steal You for a Second is from the perspective of another contestant, Mandy. And Mandy actually lasts longer in the show than Cece does. So we've gone from Cece's perspective, where she is looking from the outside, looking at the production of the show, to Mandy, who is inside the show and is watching everything unfold around her. At the beginning of the book, we know that Mandy has just broken up with her girlfriend. She's bisexual, and she, on a whim, enters the draw to be a contestant on the show because she knows it's something that her ex-partner would absolutely loathe. And she doesn't expect to get on the show, and she does. And at the group auditions, she meets a woman named Dylan, and they hit it off and they start a friendship. They both find themselves on the show, and you can tell in the story that there is this plot line where the producers are trying to weave the story of, you know, male Dylan and female Dylan having a relationship. Alongside that, you have Mandy falling for contestant Dylan and trying to work out whether Dylan's feelings for her are platonic or romantic. And it's just adorable because I love the idea of two contestants on a reality TV show falling in love with one another instead of the objective of the show, because to me, that is what I would watch. So this is sapphic. Again, it is closed door, but it is wonderful and fun. I do wish in this one that we had contestant Dylan's perspective. I just think that that would have balanced it out a little bit more, but it was still an enjoyable read. And I will definitely continue to pick up Jodi McAlister's contemporary romance works just because they're fun. They really are. Okay, I also read Runaway Road by Devney Perry. This is a contemporary romance about London, who as a youth ran away from home because her parents were under the influence of substance abuse and neglectful, so she left. And now flash forward into the future, she has just gotten divorced from the man who she'd fallen in love with. He had a lot of money. He helped her finish her education and then gave her a job at his company. But of course, she discovered him cheating, they've separated, and she has decided to do what she always does when things just get too overwhelming. She decides to run away. Now, she has a purpose for it. She has this old car that she's fixed up that she loves, but she wants to return it to one of her friends who she met while she was a runaway living on the streets. And so she starts on this cross-country journey, and her car breaks down just outside of a small town. Now, she has not taken her phone with her because she doesn't want to have any contact with her former life, and the local townspeople sort of help her out, take her back into town, get her car towed and all of that. And that's how she meets the local mechanic, who is a single dad living in the town, and he's just absolutely lovely, and he's intrigued by her, and she ends up getting stuck in town longer than intended, and so the two strike up a friendship. And they're kind of reluctant to take it further than that because they know that she's leaving. But when her stay is extended, they decide, well, what the hell? We're attracted to one another. Let's explore this. And it was just a really nice small town romance with a cinnamon roll hero and a few little mysterious goings on that delays her car from being finished. I just like the exploration of this character who is so used to running, having to stop and confront what she's feeling and maybe stay. All right, then I read two Jennifer Ashley paranormal romances from the Shifters Unbound series. Now I have a complete members vlog where I talked about these in more depth. So I read book 3, Wildcat, and book 5, Tiger Magic. Now these were all published around 2012, 2013-ish, so they are very much of that time in terms of the paranormal genre. So you have very alpha heroes in here, so be aware of that if you're going into it. And prior to this, I'd only read The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie, so this is a very different departure from what I know of Jennifer Ashley. So these are fun, if slightly old school paranormal romances. In the first book, you have a dominant feline shifter who ends up crossing paths with a human detective. It turns out that that the heroine is being stalked and is at one point kidnapped with the intent to kill her by a member of the Fae, and the police detective can't let that go. The thing I liked in this is both the hero and the heroine are very dominant characters, and so it's a much more equal footing in terms of power dynamics between the two of them, and it's the human who has to get used to the shifter society, not the other way around. Tiger Magic I actually really enjoyed a lot more. It is a different group of shifters from this book. They're slightly different towns, and in this one it is a human woman who ends up meeting a shifter at the worst possible moment of her life. She ends up discovering her fiance cheating on her. This sets off a set of chain reactions because the tiger shifter, whose name is just Tiger because he's very mysterious, he was rescued from a facility where they were experimenting on him, and he doesn't seem to remember anything else about himself, which apparently happened in the book in between these two. I haven't read that, so I'm just going with it. Anyway, he recognizes the heroine as his mate straight away, and so he does anything to protect her. This one does feature some PTSD and flashbacks and trauma from the hero being a captive of humans, so be aware of that going into it. This is a very interesting world because it is a very segregated world. Humans are so distrustful of shifters and were hunting them to the point where the shifters essentially collared themselves. They literally wear collars that shock them if they get too aggressive, and they did that voluntarily to get the humans off their back. And I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, but they're working on it. By the time we get to Tiger Magic, they're doing stuff to try and mitigate that. And also shifters are only allowed to live in one part of town. Every town has its own shifter town, and that's where the shifters have to live. So there's a lot of that going on, which I'm still unpacking in my head about how I feel about that, which is why I say it's very old school paranormal romance. Anyway, I read those. They were interesting. If you are interested in my full thoughts, you can consider becoming a member if you want to get access to that video. And then I read You and I Rewritten by Chip Pons. This is an contemporary romance. This is the author's debut book, and there are things that you can pick up in the book that indicate that it is their first book. I still really enjoyed it, and this is an interesting book because the first two-thirds of this book is this relationship between a publishing editor and his boss. It's really lovely because the boss is quite aloof and removed. We see that that's because he's trying to be professional, but he ends up falling for our main hero, and it's lovely. It's very sweet, and that relationship is lovely. There is no third act breakup in this book, which I deeply appreciate. But then there is the other plotline in the story, which is the editor receiving a manuscript that is very hard-hitting, that deals with alcoholism and with the way that affects relationships, and he is intent on publishing this book, and so he's trying to work with this author who is, I don't want to say difficult, but there's a series of things that goes on that really makes him frustrated with working with her as well, and we find out why towards the end. And that is part of the main conflict of this book in sort of the last third of the book, which interestingly enough was the part that I was really deeply fascinated by. I actually really loved just how deep the last third of the book got, to the point where I would have liked to have seen more of that developed in the stories, because I love the light fluffy stuff, but it obviously got a little bit darker towards the end because we are dealing with estranged families, we are dealing with parental abandonment and physical abuse, and a whole lot of things that have happened in the past that come up again towards the end of the book. While I liked the part where the tone of the story shifted, I know that won't be for everyone, because you go from this very light fluffy thing to something that is much more dark and much more hard-hitting and honestly very confronting, I think, for a few people. All that to say, I really enjoyed the book. It made me cry. It made me cry. What can I say? Okay, then I picked up Magic Tides by Ilona Andrews. This is the first book in the Wilmington years. This is the novella that none of us were expecting, but my God, I was so glad to get this book. I cannot tell you how much I smiled and laughed and just felt good about myself after reading this book. We do have a live show coming up this week, so you will hear more of my thoughts about this book. But essentially, Kate, Karen, and Conlon have moved out of Atlanta and they are settling in the town of Wilmington. And essentially, they've bought this fort, because of course they have, because it's Karen, and are renovating it. But Conlon has found a new friend and he casually mentions to Kate, "My friend's brother has been kidnapped and they don't know where he is." And of course, Kate being Kate, goes out to find out what's going on. Now, they've been trying to keep a really low profile. They don't want anyone to know that Karen was the former Beast Lord. They don't want anyone to know who Kate is. They don't want anyone to know that Conlon is anything other than a regular shifter kid. But of course, this case forces Kate to cross paths not only with the Order, but also with the people. And she may or may not be dealing with a water god, and it was just delightful. I loved every second of it. I just about died laughing when Kate called Hugh and their conversation, because their sibling relationship is precious to me now. Like, just the way that they interact, I adore it. I'm so glad we're getting more Kate Daniels books because they are honestly just my favorite. Okay, I also read The Four Leaf by Lee Jacquot, which is the second book in the Holy Knights series. Guys, I'm so excited to say that this book lived up to Hollow's Grove for me, because after reading the first book, Christmas on the 13th Floor, I was disappointed by that book because it just wasn't for me. But this one, when I tell you this ties for first place as my favorite book in this series so far, it is amazing. So this is a childhood friends to lovers novella. It is set around St. Patrick's Day. Our heroine owns a hotel which is called the Four Leaf, so St. Patrick's Day is really important to them. And her best friend from childhood has grown up to become an NFL player, I think. Anyway, she's had the biggest crush on him for years, but was too afraid to make a move. And he comes home for the holidays and is helping her out around the hotel. And thankfully we get both perspectives in this book, because I needed the hero's perspective in this. So it turns out that Cam has been enamored with Arya for the longest time, but because he has specific kinks, he has sort of held himself back. Anyway, tensions bubble over and finally they confront their feelings. There is primal play in here and it is delightful. Like, if you liked Hunted by Adriana Anders, you will like this novella. Then I read the third book in the series, which is Liberty Falls. This one is the romance between the local police chief and the fire chief. And the two of them have had this rivalry going for many, many years, ever since I think high school. And all of this tension comes to a head on the night of the town fair. They've kind of taken their rivalry a step too far and they've set a bet that they then have to act on. And it was really fun. Like, if I was going to rank these books, Hollow's Grove and The Four Leaf are my top two favorites. Then Liberty Falls, then Christmas on the 13th Floor. Liberty Falls features sensation play and these two very competitive, very independent, very strong characters having to find a way to give and take power in their relationship and trust the other person to do the right thing by them. Loved it. And then the final book that I want to mention is Whispers of You by Cowles, which I did receive as an e-arc from the author as part of her influencer team. This is the first book in the Lost and Found series. Cowles writes small town romantic suspense and it's great. Like, once I started reading this book, I couldn't put it down. We have Ren and Holt, who were high school sweethearts, and the opening chapter has Ren being home for a home invasion where she is attacked and shot. And then we skip forward 10 years and we discover that Holt eventually left because he, for whatever reason, he couldn't stick around. And because we get both of their perspectives, we sort of understand why. He was literally running because he felt so guilty that he couldn't protect her, when in actual fact he saved her life. But to his, I think he was only 20 at the time, 19 or 20, like, to his mind, like, he's not fully developed yet. Like, he just felt so guilty he left. And now 10 years later, his father has had a medical scare and so he's returned home for the first time, and no one believes that he's going to stick around because he's always running. Ren wants nothing to do with him. However, it's close to the 10-year anniversary of this shooting and a series of other shootings that happened the same night. And suddenly all of the survivors of those shootings are being targeted again. And Holt is determined to keep Ren safe, and that's sort of where this story goes. So there's an element of forced proximity in this small town. It's a second chance romance, and you also have this host of really awesome side characters, including Holt's family, who are just delightful, and I'm assuming those are the characters that we're getting books for the rest of the series. I just love the way that Cowles writes. It's very easy to fall into it. It's very easy to keep reading, to like the characters, to understand that even if they make a bad decision, that and trust that she's going to have them try and make it right. And even if they can't fix the thing that they've done wrong, that they will try and find a way to be better from then on, which is what I appreciated with Holt's character, because he can't change the fact that he left her when she was still recovering from her injuries. He can't change that. All he can do is change his behavior moving forward and show her that he's making that change. So I appreciated that a lot. All right, so those are the books that I read this week. In the comments, I would love to hear if you've read any of these, if you're planning on picking any of them up, or feel free to share something that you have been reading and loving over the last 7 days. If you would like to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a tiger emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.